Does the Torah instruct us how to assess whether a person's opinion should be taken at face value?
This discussion begins with the Tosefta in Masechet Sanhedrin, which is also quoted in the Talmud Bavli in Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Yod Het Amud Bet 18b. It states, "Ein moshivin melech b'Sanhedrin, v'lo melech v'kohen gadol be'ibur shana." In other words, the king cannot be appointed a member of the Sanhedrin, of the Supreme Council, legal and governmental council of the Jewish people, because it is not possible for other people to contradict him. This also has to do with the fact that he cannot be contradicted in order to ensure that he is honored and respected and held in high esteem by all at all times. That is a necessary requirement for the proper functioning of the Jewish people, that this person's standing is such that people will not and cannot contradict him. And it also has to do with the fact that when discussing halachic issues, legal issues, and any other issue that may come before the Sanhedrin, people will not feel free to express their opinion, because the king perhaps is known to feel otherwise. In other words, he cannot be treated like another member of the Sanhedrin. Even there we have in place a system whereby the junior members of the body are asked to express their opinions first, and later the senior members, so that the junior members, the younger individuals, those who have been more recently appointed to that position, will not be intimidated, will not feel that they cannot disagree with an opinion expressed by a more senior member, someone perhaps much older than they, someone who is known to be more learned and more wise than they are. None of these things are healthy for the running of a body that is trying to get at the truth and express the correct and well-considered opinion and conclusion. So that is the first statement of this Baraitha, of this Tosefta, En Moshivin Melech b'Sanhedrin. Furthermore, it says, V'lo melech v'kohen gadol be'ibur shana. And when it comes to the special Beth Din that is established of several dayanim, several judges, several individuals, to discuss the question of whether this year should be declared a leap year. In other words, every few years a 13th month is added to the lunar calendar. Most years it is 12 months. Some years it has to be made 13 months, and the month of Adar is doubled up, so to speak. In other words, there is Adar 1 and Adar 2. To that forum, which must discuss the question of Ibur Hashana, the question of whether to make this year a leap year, to that forum we do not appoint either the king or the Kohen HaGadol, the high priest, even though they are very wise and very learned and very righteous. Nevertheless, they may not participate in that body. They may not be one of those people who expresses an opinion or considers the various aspects of that question. And the Talmud explains, Melech mishum afsanya, Kohen Gadol mishum sina. With regards to the Melech, the king, the reason why he is not to be a member of that Beth Din, of that body that discusses the question of a leap year, is mishum afsanya, which has to do with his military force and the wages for those soldiers and other considerations, as we shall presently explain. And with regards to the Kohen Gadol, it has to do with the cold. What does that mean? Mishum sina. Rashi explains as follows. With regards to the king, Mishum Afsanya, Mahalek Mamon Lahayolotho, Kach V'chach L'shana. The king, at least that's how things used to work in those days, the king would pay his standing army. He was the supreme commander of the army, and it was his duty and his responsibility to pay the salary of his army, of the officers, the soldiers, and he would pay them by the year. He was required to pay them a certain amount per year. And if a month is added to the year, he is basically gained, financially speaking. He has gained a month. As Rashi says, from his perspective, he could be quite pleased that, if it were possible, that all years should be leap years, because he would always gain 1 month of wages and various payments that he is required to provide for the upkeep of the army, supplies, training, weaponry, etc. With regards to the king, his self-interest is perhaps not with regards to his own person, his own body, but in terms of his budget, in terms of his responsibilities and his plans. To him, this is an advantage. If a month will be added to the year, this will be advantageous to him, and therefore he cannot be entirely impartial. Yes, it may be that in that body, in that Beth Din, some of the Hachamim, some of the judges, some of the individuals will provide reasons, cogent reasons, why this year should be a leap year, and others may provide reasons why this year should not be a leap year. This has to do with astronomical calculations, weather patterns, agricultural issues, etc. It has to do also with when certain festivals will fall during the year. It's a complicated question, and there may be various opinions and arguments. And yes, the king may hear that, well, it's possible to view this matter in one way, and it's also possible to reach a different conclusion. And that is precisely the danger, because he will then, either consciously and more likely, especially if he's a truly righteous individual, trying to do the right thing as he perceives it, it may be that even subconsciously he will lean towards the view that is more to his advantage, without even realizing it. Because this is human nature, and this is the point. That seeing that he has a certain vested interest, seeing that one conclusion, one result will be to his advantage more than the other result, he has a natural leaning, conscious or subconscious, and therefore his opinion must be considered tainted. That is what we hear from this Baraita, from this statement of the Tosefta, and this is what Rashi has just told us. That is with regards to the Melech, the king. With regards to the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, why should he be motivated by extraneous considerations? The Talmud states, Mishum Sina, because of the cold. What does this mean? Rashi says, Eno rotzeh shetit'aber shana. The Kohen Gadol has a vested interest in the year not being declared a leap year. Mipenei hasina, because of the cold. What are we talking about? If we add a second month of Adar to the year, which is at the tail end of the winter, the months that follow, the spring, summer, and also therefore autumn months, in half a year's time, will be delayed by 1 lunar month. In other words, the weather will be somewhat different in any given month because of the fact that in terms of the solar year, in terms of the position of the earth relative to the sun, which decides the seasons and the weather patterns, a given month will be later in the year. So this means that Nisan, when Pesach falls, Pesach will be later in the year. and therefore it might be warmer, but that's not relevant to the Kohen Gadol. What is relevant is that in 6 months' time, at the time of Yom Kippurim, which is in the month of Tishrei, the 10th day of Tishrei, this will really fall in what would have been the month of Mar Heshwan. In other words, the beginning of the winter. In other words, Yom Kippur will be cooler. Not by a huge amount, but probably by 2-3 degrees centigrade, shall we say. And why should this be of any interest to the Kohen HaGadol? Rashi explains, שצריך לטבול ולקדש ביום הכיפורים 5 טבילות ו10 קידושין. On Yom Kippurim, when the Kohen HaGadol has to perform all the major aspects of the Avodah in the Mikdash, all the major aspects of the sacrificial service in the temple, as part of that service, he is required to immerse himself in the mikveh, to be tovel ba-mikveh 5 times during that day, and to wash his hands and feet 10 times on that day. وَإِمْ تِتَعْبِرْ shana, says Rashi, and if the year will be declared a leap year, Hare Tishrei b'Mar Heshwan, the month of Tishrei, which is when we have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim, will end up being in what would have been Mar Heshwan, and it will be later, and will be somewhat cooler. وَسِنَاث Mar Heshwan tiyeh b'Tishrei, and the cooler weather of Mar Heshwan will now be in Tishrei. And the Kohen HaGadol knows, he must know, that means that the water in which he has to immerse himself 5 times on Yom Kippurim will be slightly colder. One may well ask oneself, how much colder is the water going to be? We're not talking about the middle of the winter. It's not the month of Tevet, for example. True, but it will be slightly cooler. And this may have an impact on the Kohen HaGadol's opinion on the matter. Again, if we're talking about Rasha'im, we're talking about evil people, we're talking about cynical individuals who happen to be in this position of authority for all the wrong reasons. As we know, for example, towards the end of the Second Temple period, Beit Sheni, most of the Kohanim HaGadolim, the high priests, were unworthy individuals who purchased the position with money. They basically bribed Roman officials to be appointed as Kohen Gadol, high priest. With regards to such a person, there's no question that he is motivated by self-interest, and we cannot expect anything of such a person. But even when we are speaking of a very righteous king or Kohen Gadol, a high priest, afilu hasid sheba hasidim, even the most righteous and the most pious, the fact is, and this is what Hazal are teaching us here, the fact is that human beings remain always human beings. There are always questions of self-interest, of impartiality, of whether a certain conclusion may be more advantageous rather than another conclusion for this or that individual. What we call in English a conflict of interest. And it is widely recognized that when a person is thus conflicted, he should not be part of such a discussion. And if he is not known to be conflicted in this way, he should make it known. In this case, with regards to the Melech and the Kohen HaGadol, Hazal tell us it is obvious in these cases that there is this possibility of other considerations, extraneous and unworthy considerations, affecting the person's judgment. And therefore, their opinion cannot be considered pure, untainted, and impartial, and therefore they cannot be part of such a body. Now, it must be stressed that this is a straightforward halakha. There is no discussion, there is no debate about this, there is no dissenting opinion. This is straightforward halakha without question. And the Rambam quotes it, therefore, in his Mishneh Torah, and in Chidush HaChodesh, the halachot where questions to do with the Jewish calendar are discussed. Perek Revi'i Halakha Yod Aleph, chapter 4, Halakha 11. Rambam writes as follows: Ein moshivim le'ibur hashana lo melech v'lo kohen gadol. These two individuals, the king and the high priest, may not be part of the body that discusses this question of the leap year. And Rambam explains, Melech, why not? Mipeneh hayolotho or milhamotho. Rambam agrees with Rashi, but he also adds a further reason. He says, firstly, because of his soldiers, that he has to pay their salaries, he has to provide them with supplies, and therefore he has his financial budgetary considerations, as we explained, as Rashi explained. Umil hamotho, and also because of his wars, literally. In other words, his campaigns, his military campaigns. Shema da'atho nota bishvilan la'abir or shelo la'abir. Because of these considerations, he may either prefer to announce and have declared this year a leap year, or quite the opposite. He may be not to his advantage at all. Why not? In terms of his military campaigns, he may know that he will probably have to go to war or attack an enemy or execute some preemptive strike, something of this nature, in the coming months. He may be aware of this. Other people may not be aware of it. He may not even be able to tell them, but he may know that a military campaign of some kind is likely, is in the offing, maybe it's being planned. Now we all know that weather affects military campaigns. Generally, armies prefer to fight in the summer, not in the winter. In the winter they get bogged down in the mud, and the rain, the cold, etc. The time to go to war normally is in the spring and the summer, and therefore he may have his reasons, quite legitimate reasons from his perspective, why it would not be advantageous to add a month to this year, or it could also be the opposite, because he may know that it will have to be in a certain month or at a certain time for various reasons. And therefore the king has other issues that he is taking into account which are not valid, and therefore he is not allowed to be a member of this body. That is with regards to the king. Kohen Gadol and the high priest, why not? Mipnei Sina, because of the cold. Shema lo tiyeh da'atho nota la'abir. Perhaps he would lean to the opinion that it is not necessary to declare this year a leap year, so that the month of Tishrei will not end up being in a colder period of the year. Again, the difference is not going to be very, very severe. We're talking about a slight difference between the month of Tishrei and what would have been the month of Mar Heshwan. We're not talking about several months later when the weather will be much, much cooler. Nevertheless, there will be a difference. And he, the Kohen Gadol, he knows he is going to be required to enter the mikveh, immerse himself in the water 5 times on that day. And this may affect his thinking. And we should mention here that there is a further interpretation of this question with regards to the Kohen Gadol, and that is of the Tosafot. The Tosafot question Rashi and therefore Rambam's explanation with regards to the Kohen Gadol having to be tovel, to immerse himself in the cold water of the mikveh on Yom Kippurim, because they quote the Talmud in Masechet Yoma Daf Lamed Aleph, where it states that they used to try and take the edge off the coldness of the water by having heated pieces of iron thrown into the mikveh on Yom Kippurim, and thus warm up the water to some extent at least. One imagines this would not produce a warm mikveh, but it might be sufficient to take the chill or the extreme chill out of the water. And therefore the Tosafot say the water of the mikveh is not the issue. Therefore, what is the question? In other words, as we know, all Kohanim, and certainly the Kohen Gadol, perform all their tasks in the Mikdash when they are barefoot. They are not allowed to wear shoes. And the floor must be made of stone. So we're talking about a person standing in his bare feet on a stone floor. The cooler the weather, the colder the stone floor will be, and therefore less pleasant to stand on. And that, according to the Tosafot, is the the matter under discussion, not the water of the mikveh. The point, at any rate, is clear. These individuals, the king, the melech, and the Kohen HaGadol, the high priest, may not be part of this body because they may be swayed by other considerations which affect them in some way. Here we see clearly the tremendous insight that Hazal, our sages, had with regards to human nature. Again, not only the human nature of evil people or your average person who has better qualities and other qualities and characteristics that are perhaps not quite so positive, but even with regards to the most righteous individuals, when there are other extraneous considerations which may be advantageous to this or that person, we must take this into account. We must ask ourselves, is this person able to view the matter impartially and therefore express a true, intellectually honest and untainted opinion? That is what we learn from this halakha. Of course, this is only an example. In other words, from this halakha, which is specific with regards to its context, we learn a general principle, and that is that when one wishes to consult with a person, an expert, someone who is knowledgeable in a certain area, we must also ask ourselves, and we must be aware of the possibility that this person cannot really answer the question with complete impartiality, with complete honesty, that he may have this or that issue, consideration, or even questions of being threatened or being disadvantaged in some way if he expresses his true opinion. And this is true in all walks of life. This is true with regards to asking a rabbi a question to do with the Torah, halakha. We must ask ourselves, is this person in a position, is he independent? Is he in a position where he can truly express his view without fear of any reprisal or having to pay any price? If, for example, he is part of a system, of an establishment that expects him to respond in a certain way and can threaten him or even perhaps put him out of his job or cause him other forms of damage or discomfort or an unpleasantness if he doesn't toe a certain line, then we must be aware of this fact. The same is true of a doctor. A doctor who works within a certain medical establishment or system, a doctor who works, for example, in a hospital, can he express his opinion on all medical matters against the opinion which may controvert the opinion of the management of that hospital, the people above him who pay his salary, who can also therefore cease his employment or downgrade his level of employment? That is not at all a simple matter. If a person asks his doctor, do you recommend that I be vaccinated or not vaccinated, that I undergo this particular medical procedure or not, or what do you think about this medication? Is that doctor in a position to answer the question based on his knowledge and what he knows and also perhaps suspects to be true? Or is he sometimes unable to really express his true, honest opinion? Because if word gets out that he said to this person, between you and me, I think you should not be vaccinated, or I think that medical procedure is too risky, even though most of my colleagues, and I know the hospital thinks it's a good idea, and I happen to also know that the hospital earns quite a lot of income from such procedures, and therefore they're quite interested in these procedures being undertaken by patients. But between you and me, I think this procedure is too risky in your case, or I don't think it's all that it's made out to be. I don't think the result of this procedure or this vaccination or this medication will be as positive and as risk-free as many people are telling you. I think, for example, this doctor may say to his patient, I think that there are certainly risks involved, and I would not recommend it. But he also may know that if word gets out that this is what he said to a few patients, a few people who consulted with him, he may receive flack, and it may be much more than flack. He may be intimidated. He may be warned the first time and told that if you say such things again, which impact our hospital or our medical services, like in Israel, a Kupat Holim, a medical fund, this is not our policy, and you cannot work for us and express such opinions. The same is true of a lawyer, or any professional, or any tradesman for that matter. Let's take a tradesman who is consulted on a certain type of project in a person's home. A person wants to add something or fix something or install something, and this tradesman may know how to do a certain thing because he's done it many times. He's very knowledgeable and experienced in that field. He also knows there's another way to do it, perhaps a better way, but he is not so experienced. Maybe he's never done it that way, and maybe he's scared of learning a new way. He's not sure how it will turn out. Well, obviously he will prefer to give the advice that this is how it should be done, and yes, I can do it, because he wants the job. Only an independent person who is not seeking employment, who has nothing to lose, only that person can really weigh up all the options and all the possibilities. A further example is the system by which judges are appointed to the judiciary. In Israel, for example, we suffer from the following situation, which is quite unique in the world, that sitting judges of the Supreme Court, for example, are able to, in practice, have a veto power over the appointment of any new member to that body, to that court. So the judges are able to design, as it were, to their custom design the court as they would wish to see it, not officials who represent the public, not other relevant parties, but the judges themselves, because it is to their advantage. This is an entirely unreasonable and unacceptable state of affairs, and it in fact does not exist anywhere else in the world, as many people know and as has been commented on over the years. With regards to the ability of a Rav, of a rabbi, expressing his Torah opinion on a matter, I wish to relate here that which I heard many years ago from Mori Hagon Rabbi Moshe Tzuriel Shlita. Rav Tzuriel related to me that in a book published in the memory of Harav Shilo Raphael, who was a Dayan, a rabbinical court judge, who passed away at a relatively young age many years ago, he saw the following. I have not seen this book myself, but this is what he related to me, and I'm certain that this is accurate. There, the story was told that Rabbeinu Yisrael Misalant, a very famous rabbinical figure of the 19th century, Lemignonam, well known for being the founder of what's known as the Musar movement, but it is less well known that he was also a tremendous Tamid Chachamim. He was a great Rav, without reference to the Musar movement. He was simply a great rabbinical figure. And it was noted by certain people that he did not accept a rabbinical position in one of the larger, more important cities in Eastern Europe, as would have been expected from someone of his caliber and someone of his standing. And he also came from that part of the world originally. And he was asked about this on one occasion. Why did the Rav not wish to accept a rabbinical position in one of those communities? It was both a respectable and reasonably well-paying position. Why would the Rav not want to do this? Apparently they also knew that he had expressed a lack of interest in accepting such positions. And his response was as follows. He said, if I accept such a position and then I am asked a certain question, an halachic question, and I know that with regards to this question, certain poskim, very famous poskim, such as the Shach or the Taz or Rabbi Akiva Eger, expressed a certain position. Shall we say that they said this thing is mutar, it is permissible. But having learnt the topic well, I am of the opinion that it is in fact asur, it is forbidden. Then I will face the following predicament. I can either speak my mind, speak the truth as I understand it, or I can fall in line with the rabbinic world, most of whose members believe that this particular psak halacha, this opinion is correct, and this is what one must answer. But then I will be dishonest. In other words, if I say what I'm expected to say, what other rabbanim would say, then I will be lying. I will not be honest. I will be making, therefore, a mockery of the Torah, because the Torah is about truth and is about searching for truth, seeking truth, and speaking only that which we know to be true. If I present anything else as the truth, as the halacha, I will be dishonest. I will be, in fact, sinning. On the other hand, if I express my true view, and I'm convinced that this is the truth, because I have studied the subject in depth and I have thought over it a great deal, but it is not the standard, not the establishment view, it is not the usual opinion, then people will say, who is this rabbi who has these strange ideas? He doesn't even know what the famous poskim said about this, apparently, because he certainly wouldn't have disagreed with them. And that would also endanger my position or make things uncomfortable, and people would start speaking behind my back. And therefore I chose not to enter into that circumstance from the outset. I chose to shun such rabbinical positions so that I could remain an honest man and speak the truth. So spoke Rabbi Yisrael Misalant, and perhaps here we also understand why he was also known as the founder of the Musar movement, the movement of Torah ethics. And this is truly something worth reflecting upon. These are very real questions, and they affect almost all areas of life and many of the decisions that we are required to make on a daily basis, particularly with regards to our Torah lives, our halachic views and opinions, according to which we live and direct ourselves and our children. It is also a very crucial issue with regards to how we deal with our various health concerns and medical issues, etc. And therefore these things must always be present in our thinking. We must be aware of these things and not deny them, because to deny this elemental truth, this profound truth that Chazal point out in such a clear and unequivocal fashion, to deny such truth is lack of wisdom and in fact folly.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org. If you are inspired by Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to get involved in Torah Eretz Yisrael activities in your local area, please fill out the relevant form by going to the link which appears on the screen.